And he's got his faithful traveling.
Have Jeff give a little info too. So I've got my good water here, so you guys can be jealous. I just came back last week. The reason my wife didn't fly with us because she tapped Jeff, and he's happy he came, but he's a real brave co-pilot. Was because we went to Albuquerque last week, and the water board wanted to have a discussion about whether they should continue to add silica fluoride to the water supply. And so I drug Betty along, and we got in a lot of turbulence, and not worse than driving down a rutted, backcountry road at 100 miles an hour. But she wasn't pleased with that, and she said, "You're gonna go," because she's afraid I would fall asleep. There's plenty of chairs here. So anyway, that was but that's the genesis of this talk here. This is what I call my 3-minute city council talk. I'll expand it out for 20 minutes because in 3 minutes you have to talk about it. So I'm going to talk like the next. It's going to take me 20 minutes. And so I call it he said, she said, because you do not learn anything in these kind of forums, because I say one thing, she says the other, he says the other, and so nobody has any idea what is right, what is wrong, what's true, what's false. And so I decided that for this particular forum, I was going to use what they say. And so they say that if you got a baby and you're going to feed it concentrated formula that you have to add water to, or you're going to put powder in there, that if you don't want your kid to have funny looking spotted teeth, then you probably should use distilled water or fluoride-free water. Okay? Does that strike anybody as kind of strange?
Yeah.
That we can't feed our babies tap water because it gives them so much of a poison that it makes the teeth look funny. Does that ring any bells? Yeah. That's what they say. And so there's a cute little symbol there on the top right-hand side, and that is a graphic representation of hydrofluosilicic acid. When they say, oh, it's natural, it's natural, it's natural. No, it's not. It's a man-made product. It's extremely unusual. It's patented. Can you patent an element? No, you can't. There's a patent on hydrofluosilicic acid for extracting lead from brass. It's a magnet for lead, and you'll see why that's important in just a second. But according to, does fluoride work to reduce tooth decay if it is swallowed? Typically, water is swallowed, I think. And the answer is no, it does not. And where did I get this terrible information? I got it from the Journal of the American Dental Association and the Center for Disease Control, the very people that are out telling us to put it in the water. It doesn't work if you swallow it. The only measurable dental effects, other than dental fluorosis, are topical. So it's like sunblock. You don't drink it. The Center for Disease Control, the very people that will come to your city, an army of people will come to your city telling you how good it is for you to have this stuff in your water, blah, blah, blah. Best thing since sliced bread, says that the amount of tooth decay in a population is not related inversely to the concentration of fluoride in the enamel. More is not necessarily more efficacious or better. So it doesn't make any difference if you swallow it and get it in your enamel, or if you brush with your toothpaste and get it in your enamel, because that's not how it works. Its anti-caries effect is after the tooth comes in the mouth and topical. So Featherstone in the ADA journal said even when the outer layer of enamel has higher fluoride levels, such as about the same level as Crest toothpaste, it does not measurably withstand acid-induced dissolution, which is their way of measuring tooth decay, because tooth decay is basically a bug living on your teeth making acid. And that the fluoride incorporated developmentally, so you were in the womb and your blood was high in fluoride because your mother was drinking fluoridated water, and it gets incorporated into the tooth bud, or maybe you had some of these fluoride drops and tablets you gave your kid and you built it up inside their tooth. It is into the normal tooth material is insufficient to have a measurable effect on acid solubility. So these are what they say, and they won't deal with any of these things. The effects are topical. The FDA says, keep out of reach of children. Same warning on a .38 caliber pistol that's loaded. Keep out of reach of children. In case of accidental ingestion, contact the Poison Control Center immediately. And the Dairy Queen on top of this is not how you're supposed to do it. This is what they say. Half of a pea-sized drop is all the toothpaste you're supposed to use. Bad for sales, huh? But that's what they say. And its inhibiting effects are topical on the germs that cause tooth decay. Does that make anybody feel kind of like queasy? It's going to make the germs in your mouth sick. What was it named that I swallowed? Oh, you're so much bigger than a little germ. Yeah, but I'm around here a lot longer. So, you know, it inhibits the bacterial's ability to breathe and digest. And just like fluoride inhibits the cells in a child's body, making new teeth and bones. And the spots that we were talking about on teeth is dental fluorosis. It's due to the inhibition of matrix metalloproteinase 20, or MMP20. Well, gee, that's a big word. What does that do? Let's look it up on the internet. What does Wikipedia say? It says that this is essential for such things as embryonic development, reproduction, tissue remodeling, as well as disease processes such as arthritis and metastasis. I don't think we ought to be sticking a wrench in God's plan, do you? That's what this does. This is a deadly poison. I was at talking to the Maine Hygienist Association last Saturday, and a young lady in the audience is 1 week away from graduating. And I said, did they discuss fluoride oh yes, we know lots of discussion. And I said, so how much fluoride did they say it would take to kill you? And she said, oh, a garbage can full. It's really, really safe. And I said, that's why children die in the dental chair. Because 5 milligrams per kilogram will kill anybody in this room. It's called the presumably toxic dose. So an aspirin-sized amount of fluoride will kill everybody in here. Or if you took it. It's okay, it stays in the bottle. But, so, one of the reasons we have so much misinformation out here is the new graduates are told myths. They're not taught facts, because you can look that up, and it's called PTD, presumably toxic dose. Look it up, it's on the EPA's website. PTD for fluoride is 5 milligrams per kilogram. And think about that. Why am I saying milligrams, which is a weight, per kilogram, which is a weight? I weigh 100 kilograms. So 5 times 100, so 500 milligrams, about the same size as an aspirin, would kill me. But a baby weighs 4 kilograms. So 20 milligrams would kill the baby. All dose is weight for weight. And so you want to see how poorly educated dentists are. Ask them, what dose of fluoride causes harm to humans? And they'll say, well, we know it's a lot more than 1 part per million. See how you're missing something there? That's a concentration. That's not a dose. A dose is weight for weight. Parts per million is concentration. So would you have to drink a bathtub full to get a toxic dose? Not if you're a baby. A baby drinks its weight in water every 4 days. That means every 4 days it's going to swallow enough fluoride to kill it. Whoa! 20 days, I think is what it takes. I'll show you the math in a minute. So, second question is fluoride safe for babies with a handicap? And, well, no. Let's do the math.
When they are receiving,
You can't hear this.
formula that's concentrated and has to be diluted.
This is $1 million lobbyist.
Babies will receive a lot of water.
Babies get a lot of water.
And some will receive higher than what is considered to be the tolerable.
Upper tolerable intake is 0.6, like 6 cents.
In excess of that.
And so the baby gets a quarter. So, you know, if you were going to give them a drug, would you give them 4 times more than the manufacturer recommends? Well, this is the EPA saying this kind of stuff. And so they say, so I went to I think it's the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry, an advocate for fluoride in the water supply. But if you happen to be one of those people who are in a fluoride deficient area, like maybe you fought and kept your water free of fluoride, like Santa Barbara, Santa Cruz, Monterey, oh gee, sounds like all the wealthy people don't drink fluoride. From birth to 6 months, no fluoride in the water, period, zero. No fluoride in the baby's formula, no fluoride in prescription dose either. Well, okay. But forget the infant. How about if you're 6 months to 3 years old? Doesn't it get kind of hot around here in the summertime? So your little kid comes in about noon and says, "Ma, I want a glass of water." No, you had your dose this morning. You have to wait till tomorrow. Or maybe the older brother is out there playing a little soccer. He says, "Oh, I'm really thirsty." No, you had 2 cups this morning, so you can't have any more till tomorrow. And maybe his older brother's out running marathons, and he's 16 years old, and he said, "No, you can't drink any more than 4 cups." I'm sorry, I don't think you can reasonably put anything in the water intended to medicate humans and not overdose some of us tremendously. Research has shown that mother's milk has almost no fluoride in it. That's what God wants the baby to be drinking. Do you think God made a mistake? Fluoride in tap water is responsible for a substantial percentage of dental fluorosis, says the National Institute of Dental Research. These are the people advocating we put it in the water. And they're saying, yeah, it causes quite a bit of dental fluorosis. And there's the graph. A little bit of fluoride in the water, a little bit of dental fluorosis. But note that even when there's almost 0.3, a little tiny bit of fluoride in the water, there's still a substantial amount of dental fluorosis. You know why that is? Here. Beverages, most bottled waters, wines, cereals, Wheaties is 10 parts per million. So everybody's overdosed with fluoride because it is the 13th most abundant element on the planet, and it leaks out of everything. Oil refineries, concrete factories, the etched computer circuit boards with it. It's everywhere. The welders get poisoned with fluoride from welding because it's in flux. It's the flux that makes the weld flow. So it's very important to industry to have open access to fluoride. That's what this is all about. Got nothing to do with teeth. So if your child gets dental fluorosis, you don't blame the brick factory. And you don't even blame the dentist. Because the dentist will blame you. Oh, you probably gave them a toothpaste and they swallowed it. Well, they weren't supposed to have toothpaste? No, it says don't let them swallow it. And they can't have it before they're 6 years old. You probably gave it when they were too young. And the same people in the same study did this. And this is 39,000 children, randomized, standardized. And there is no statistically significant difference between fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities. So you're spending millions of dollars on a fake program to cover up the fact that there's still 13% of the kids get damaged in non-fluoridated areas. So if they get damaged more, then you can't say where it came from, right? So is fluoride safe for everyone? No, it is not. And who says that kind of stuff? This is too hard for you to read. It's the Agency for Toxic Substance Disease Registry. It's part of the CDC. And it said subsets of the population are unusually susceptible to toxic effects of fluoride. That includes the elderly. That's anybody over 50. People with deficiencies of calcium, magnesium, vitamin C. The very poor people that can't afford to get the toothpaste and swallow it are the ones that are injured most by it because they are deficient in their nutritional intake. Or babies that are deficient in iodine are extremely vulnerable. We have huge areas in the United States that have very little iodine. My wife's father always said, if you can't see the water from the restaurant, don't eat fish. And because fluoride is excreted through the kidneys, if you have deficiencies of kidneys, that's 13% of the population have deficient kidneys. Should we put a drug in the water that harms 13% of the population? It accumulates in their bones faster than it does in adults. But who else does it accumulate fast in? That's the children. The children absorb almost all the fluoride, well, 70, 80% of it. And that in their bones for life. This accumulates in the bones, and the same thing it does to the metalloproteinase, MMP20, it does to their bones. And so you end up with fractured bones. Is ingested fluoride approved by the Food and Drug Administration? That's one of the reasons I like to have my friend here, Jeff Green, is because you will see the reference on the bottom is the www.keepersofthewell.org, and that is where you will find all of the answers to all of the questions of the congressional investigation of 2000. Because Jeff asked a bunch of simple questions. Is ingested fluoride approved by the Food and Drug Administration for the purpose of reducing tooth decay? And they said, no, it is not. So the very people that are supposed to approve drugs have said, no, it is not. And they went on to say they've never approved any fluoride-containing substance intended to be ingested to reduce tooth decay. And they neglected to mention that in 1975, gee, that's quite a while ago. That's 2 years before my airplane was made. There's no substantial evidence of drug effectiveness as prescribed or recommended in the label. And they allowed the companies to voluntarily withdraw 35 applications for fluoride vitamins, saying there's no substantial evidence of drug effectiveness as prescribed or suggested in its labeling. This is what our Food and Drug Administration says. But, and this is the thing that I call it the wink and the nod of the old boys system. Yeah, well, it's not approved, but we'll say it's not a drug. We'll say it's a natural mineral. What do you think? The children need their fluoride, right? Oh. But they give a wink and a nod so that this program can continue. It's beneficial to somebody, and I think you better figure out who it is. And so, to wrap it up, I say, basically, it's really just as simple as 1, 2, 3. Dental benefits, if any, are topical. It's not safe for the baby. Not FDA approved. So what pops into your head is, why this endless argument? For 60 years, we've been arguing about this. This is what they say. Would you want some of that in your water? Well, one of the reasons this argument goes on is what the dentist and the dental hygienist are told. We have no training in toxicology. And I drove James to one of our meetings. There is an organization called the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology that studies toxicology. And toxicology is how poisons break you. How poisons poison. You know, it's interesting. I like it. It's a hobby. I got degrees in biochemistry and physiology, and I was a medical technologist in dental school. So I know how the body works. So it was interesting to me to understand how it's broken. And so here's the scientific blog, and they're talking about the National Academy of Science Review 2006 of fluoride, where the Academy didn't come out with a really nice answer. And so here's what they told the dentist. In 2006, the National Research Council identifies severe fluorosis as the only documented effect of fluoride at 2 to 4 milligrams per liter. And concentrations for community water fluoridation and the current dosage schedule, which I just showed you, none for the baby, and other modalities ensure safety. It'd be nice to know how that happens. But it's simply not true. So they lie to the dentist, and the dentist, believing what he's told, or she's told, carries that lie on to you. That's how this goes on so long. So I wrote an email to my friend Kathleen Thiessen, who you can watch, Dr. Thiessen. She sat on the National Academy. She's a scientist, and so she talks like a scientist. So I animated her graphs for her. She uses log scale, and if you know anybody knows about log scale, 1 tick to here is 10, 2 ticks is 100, 3 ticks is, wait a minute, it's multiples of 10, 1,000, 10,000, so she used a log scale, so, oh, it's just 4 or 5 ticks to the right, well, 10 times 10 times 10 times, whoa! So the baby gets a huge dose, and watch Poison Babies, I can send you the PDF of her talk, she gave it to me. So I asked Kathy, is that true? And she said that the toxicology risk assessment experts voted unanimously to reject the Environmental Protection Agency's maximum contaminant level goal, which is you can be exposed to this substance for a lifetime with no adverse health effects. On the basis of known effects, she said skeletal fluorosis is one of the things that we listed, which is good because my wife and I filmed a documentary in China of people that were crippled at 4 parts per million. They're bent over, can't walk, in pain. So obviously, what the blogger was saying was not true, but they also said bone fractures. They weren't specific hip fracture versus arm because both of those are associated. Severe dental fluorosis, that's where parts of the teeth are missing. Therefore, 4 parts per million is not safe. The toxicology, they did not say that fluoridation is safe. They did not evaluate the safety or efficacy of fluoride. They point out lots of areas that need research, such as people with kidneys, iodine deficiencies, and stuff like that. They pointed out that some effects, thyroid suppression especially, can occur at exposure levels in terms of milligrams per kilogram per day, which is how Dr. Thiessen talks, that are reached by people at fluoride concentrations in drinking water from 1 to 4. 1 to 4. And especially in the baby. Putting even a small amount of safety factor between the unsafe or possibly safe puts possibly safe well below community water fluoridation levels, says Dr. Thiessen. That's math. They don't like math. So it's not fluoride. The product that is added to 91% of the water fluoridation schemes is raw, untreated, hazardous waste from the pollution scrubber systems of the phosphate fertilizer mining industries called hydrofluosilicic acid from Florida, spelled with a U, China, Mexico, and Japan and Belgium, from giant mines. So you're basically drinking mine waste. Thank you very much. Think of all the money it saves them. And at the Albuquerque meeting, Howard Pollack said that there is no severe dental fluorosis whatsoever at community water fluoridation levels. You know how you can tell they're lying? Their lips are moving. Because if you go to the Center for Disease Control, 2005, it's online, CDC publishes this to tell everybody, and you see that the yellow line is moderate and severe dental fluorosis. And there's a lot of it. But there's a lot of mild dental fluorosis. Mild dental fluorosis is very ugly. I've shown you pictures of mild dental fluorosis, spots all over your teeth. And very mild, which is smaller spots all over your teeth. So, who wants spots on their teeth? That's what they say. Oh, I want to point out another thing. If you break it up by racial origin, that you will see that Hispanics and African Americans have a lot more severe dental fluorosis and fluorosis in general than the Caucasians. And we know why. And it's the same reason that the Caucasians have, where low silica fluoride, the Caucasians are the lowest in blood level lead, Hispanics second, African American third. What's that about? Because they have darker skin, their bodies are better at absorbing calcium. Lighter skinned people, sunshine turns cholesterol into vitamin D. And that helps your body absorb calcium. Good thing. But what if you have a dark skin? You don't get as much vitamin D. So God in her infinite wisdom decided that she would make intestines that were really good at picking up calcium. Unfortunately, lead looks like calcium. So that's this graph here on the bottom line, where their lead level goes up without exposure to silicon fluoride. But the top line is when they have hydrofluosilicic acid added to the water supply, there was a 6-fold increase in African Americans with high blood levels of lead. That damages your community. Seriously damages it. You get mad at somebody, you shoot them 3 times and say, oh, I'm sorry. So they argued about that, and so Sawan did an experiment with rats, and put the rats, and we had a control rat, we put in silicon fluoride, and then we put in lead, and then we put silicon fluoride in lead, and their blood level of lead shot through the ceiling. And they said, oh, silicon fluoride lead dramatically increases. And then Leite did the other experiment
on dental fluorosis and showed that silicon fluoride, dental fluorosis, silicon fluoride, a lot of dental fluorosis. So that's what we're seeing in the human studies. That's why the Hispanic kids and the black kids have more dental fluorosis from the same exposure levels. We're giving them lead and fluoride. So I made a bumper sticker up. I have 2 of them on my truck. Fluoride's not safe for a baby. Everybody agrees, including the American Dollar Association. And I thank you for your attention, and I'm going to get... So let me tell you the problem. And so when people hear this, they all get excited and they're ready to, you know, run into the fray with their pile of papers and their references to the National Academy, and they got all the information, and they go in and they start putting papers in front of elected officials saying, here, this is going on. Dr. Kennedy talked, and here, this is going on. This is a terrible problem for our country. It's causing learning disorders and hip fractures and mental impairment and yada, yada, yada. And the elected officials says, well, thank you for coming today. I really appreciate hearing from you, and how's your lovely wife and your daughter? They're doing well at school. I hope you vote for me in the next election. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing. And don't do a thing. Because carrying paper into an elected official means that you're carrying a message that they don't have to receive because they're protected. You can't sue City Hall, remember that? So they've been sued 1,000 times over the years. Every single court has said they're the deciders. They get to decide. We don't get to decide. We elected them to decide for us because we're too stupid to make these decisions ourselves, you know. So when you go in with the blah, 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 they give you, hi, how are you? Thanks for coming. And I really appreciate this information. I'll get right to it. Jeff and I used to put piles of it together. And it's so much that we get all distorted and everything, so we tab it and shrink wrap it. And then we go back and see it later. And Jeff, somebody was being especially nice to us about, oh yes, I read everything you said and it's really nice and thank you for coming and all that stuff. And Jeff pointed out on the shelf, it's still shrink wrapped. So that doesn't work. And we were talking a moment ago about mercury fillings. There's no argument that mercury is damaging the kidney of children. They did a horribly unethical experiment in Portugal where they put mercury fillings in orphans and then they measured it and they said, well, group A versus B, we can see no difference. But they didn't allow other people to look at the data until a few years later. And a few years later, when it's a government study, so they can't hide the data for long. So a few years later, when the data was made available to some computer wizard investigators, one of the principal investigators from the original study went shooting into the press and published a paper showing it damaged the kids' kidneys. He knew that the day the study was done. I asked him if it was causing that problem, and he said, we haven't done the analysis yet. Well, you have to do the analysis right away because the stuff is not well preserved, it'll change. So he lied to me, in my opinion. And soon thereafter were 2 more studies showing those children's kidneys were damaged. But more interesting than that, when you analyze the fillings, that some of the kids in the controls had mercury fillings. Say, you know what we call that where I'm from? Cheating. So with the computer, they took the kids with 1 filling and put them in, no fillings, and made one group A. Group B was 1 filling, group C is 2 fillings, group so forth and so on. And what they showed was a nice straight line graph. Every parameter measured, except IQ. Tremor, mental impairment, memory loss, every parameter measured, there was damage to those children. What we should do is send an army of biological dentists over there and take those mercury fillings out of those children today. But what we get from the advocates is, oh, that's just 1 study, let's do some more. No, stop it. You could stop the use of all mercury fillings instantly if we enforced existing laws. The occupational health and safety, if you go to work at the hazardous waste dump, the day you check into work, they hand you a list of everything you're going to be exposed to at the waste dump. They hand you a hard hat, a respirator, coveralls, and that's their obligation. By law, they have to protect you from exposure, occupational exposure to toxic materials. You go in a dental office and they're wearing Hawaiian shirts. I know, because I used to wear a Hawaiian shirt. Or I got this nice airplane shirt. And, well, how do you get a job at the toxic waste dump and wear a Hawaiian shirt? Because they're breaking the law. When you open the amalgam capsule, when you mix a new filling, you'd like to have a new silver filling, yes. And mix it up. Open the capsule, it's 3,000 parts per million mercury, or more. When they go to polish your teeth to the hygienist with a rubber cup, 2,000 to 3,000 parts per million mercury. OSHA has a standard called permissible exposure limit of 100. Never to be exceeded under any circumstances, considered immediately hazardous to health, evacuate and return in a spacesuit. And here are these women and men exposed to levels that are multipliers of that. How do they get away with it? Wink and a nod. Jeff and I tried to get OSHA to go in and inspect. And they said, we don't inspect unless we get a complaint. I said, well, I wish the highway patrol was that way. Say, Smokey, I saw Kennedy driving down this road here the other day, and he was going a little bit over the speed limit. Would you go give him a ticket? Oh, yeah, I got a complaint. I got to go give you a ticket, Kennedy. So, I can balance the budget. We can get rid of all these people who are playing golf and drinking coffee, because they're not doing their job. But we found out how to make them do their job. Is that when they receive a specific complaint from a currently employed person who says, I'm being exposed to mercury in Joe Schmo's dental office, and he hasn't measured the office, or measured me, or given me a respirator, and he's not doing anything to protect me. I want you to come look at the hazardous communication notebook and look at the measurements that he's made in the office, because we are mixing this 10 to 15 times a day. Come check the records. And you know what they're going to find is a blank sheet of paper, because Joe Schmo does not have the equipment to measure. So that's called compliance with all laws. And it doesn't mean you've got to be against mercury. No, I'm in favor of female fertility, because occupational exposure in dental offices reduces the woman's ability to conceive by about 40%. And some of the kids that are conceived come out odd. So we don't need that kind of occupational exposure, and we have laws against that, thankfully. We just don't have enforcement of those laws, because it's like you got to call the highway patrol to get them to show up. So I'm saying, in the law, it allows employees to make anonymous complaints. Just keep your lips shut. Hello, I'm working at Joe Schmo's office, and they're mixing mercury all over the place. It's a mess. And I want you to come and protect me, because they're not measuring the office and they're not protecting me. Your address is 1234. Come today. They promise to be there within 2 weeks. Open the book. No measurements? Fine. No record of occupational equipment? Engineering controls? Protective equipment? Fine. And they're going to keep doing that until Joe Schmo gets the idea that, say, there are more laws in here, and the American Dental Association was sued over mercury in 1994, and they say we owe no duty of care to the public. We represent the industry. So people think they're a government agency. They're a lobbyist for dentists and dental manufacturers. Understand who you're talking to. They've always recommended mercury since 1859, when they drove the other dental society out of business. It said called them poison metal fillings. Then they began to call them silver, so that people would know they were mercury. So Jeff, using that kind of logic, has worked out a different kind of program where we can protect the water supply and our community. And he calls it safe water. Because everybody wants safe water, don't they? And by enforcing all existing regulations and laws, you can achieve that. But the trouble is, as a citizen, we don't get to. We're not the deciders. So what you have to do is you have to find someone who's willing to help you do that in a position of authority. And if you can't find somebody, pick some duck in here and say, it's your turn to run for office, we'll all vote for you. Then you have to sit through those boring meetings. And so, Tex, come on over. He really does have horses.
Well, I'm just a ride along anyway, as you all know. Hey, I'm gonna ask you to raise your hands in a couple minutes, but I want you to understand that I'm not gonna ask you personal questions or that kind of thing, but I'd like you to look around and be able to see what people are raising their hands and so forth, because they're pretty simple questions, but they have a lot to do with how I work in terms of assisting people who really wanna actually stop something. Virtually all of us seem to start off the same way when we learn information, and so when I get people who call me up on the telephone, in most cases, they've already hit the wall. They've already attempted to accomplish something, and they've either gone to a city council or they've gone to someone else, and they basically have just, as he was talking about, they thank them for sharing. And sometimes they did it nicely, and sometimes they did it very rudely. But in any case, it usually meant that they had to come to that point before the other were willing to look at the fact that there might be a different direction. What I would suggest to you is that most of us start off at the same place. And what I'm going to call an advocate, without necessarily making that a good or bad thing, but for those of us become advocates, it's usually because we become angry at the injustice of something. David Kennedy has worked a way to try to be able to not have fluoridated water in his house, and he's got enough money to do that if it's possible to do it at all. I live up in the mountains on a well, and I'm not going to drink the stuff. But we're the ones that are working and spending all the time with it. So we have our own anger at injustice, and so this isn't something I'm pointing a finger at, but I'm suggesting to you that almost advocates of almost everything, there's some injustice that we're angry enough at that perpetuate our interest and keep us moving along, especially when we see things that appear to be very daunting. So one of the things that happens for me is that when someone calls up, they usually want to tell me their story about what they've been experiencing and kind of how they feel about it and what they ran into and so forth. And it's important for me to hear it. Even though I've heard it 100 times, 1,000 times, and I've heard it over and over again, it's important for me to hear them and so forth. And so I do spend that time for us to be able to do it. But at some point, when there's an understanding, at least on their part, that I've been listening to them and I'm willing to participate with them, I usually tell them that there's certain things that I believe that are probably true for most of us that become these advocates, and in this particular case. And so I'm going to ask you to raise your hands, and I'm going to give you 3 things, and just raise your hands if you agree with it or not. It's not going to, we're not counting or doing anything like that. The first thing I would suggest is that for those people who work on these kind of issues, almost always they believe that people are responsible for their own health. If you agree with that, raise your hand. Okay? Look around so you can see how, that basically most of the people in the room, and it doesn't matter who is or isn't, but believe basically that we're responsible for our own health. Second, that we believe that people have a right to all of the information that's material to their decision making. Not necessarily informed consent, but informed consent, without having to make it formalized. Okay? And the third thing is that we believe normally that we don't believe that the majority of meat eaters can go around and tell all the vegetarians they have to eat meat, or vice versa. Okay, now it's really important to understand that even though the majority of you raise your hands, my job most of the time is to let people know that's great, that's what attracted me, that's some of the reasons why some of us continue to work on this, but we're not necessarily in the majority. And the messages that would resonate for us and that we would suggest we should be using all the time for someone else is based on the fact that we already have that perception. Even to the point that says, doing there's a big difference between a referendum and an initiative, but in either case, that is not a decision we would normally want someone to take. I mean, who cares if the majority of people think I should be a vegetarian or eat meat whichever way that I feel in it. In fact, that's contrary to what I believe is a personal decision for you to really protect your own bodily integrity. So my first beginning with most people is to let them know that those things that we almost automatically drive towards, unfortunately, aren't the most effective way to get something done, because in fact what happens is we don't have to really do a lot for people who already agree with us. So I would suggest to you that one of the things that ends up happening is the first reaction from hearing something that is something going on negative, much of what David's described, but probably all of you have had your own ability to be able to look up something or find something, and there's something that stands out stronger than another one, and that's enough to get you going. So the shaping of what I'm going to call the opposition and the conflict of a pro and a con often is the fact that the person who's just learned about it is pretty much in a hurry and wants to stop this stuff. It's an insanity. We can all use that word and realize we're all talking about the same thing. It's an insanity. They're doing something that's so far off that it doesn't have any reasonable support for it at all. But even so, in taking action and trying to attempt to get other people to take action, the tendency is to go, well, obviously they don't know what I know, or they couldn't be that stupid. they wouldn't be taking that kind of action. So we go out and we try to find information. Sometimes it's readily available, sometimes it's already in a brochure, sometimes you pick it up from someone like David or someone else, Dr. Preston. But in fact, what ends up happening is we're pretty much in a hurry to get it out to someone else, thinking that if we could just say it better, if we could just write it better, if we could just do a better DVD, or if we could just do better whatever, if we put that out there, people will understand and they'll make the shift. And then, unfortunately, if you're talking to me, then I get to be the bad guy and say, sorry, being right has absolutely nothing to do with this. The fact that you are right may stimulate your interest in it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to shift just because you're right. Somebody else believes they're right on the other side, and the fact that we may know that they're not right doesn't really help that any more anyway. And you know, I'm not going to get into all of your personal relationships and have you raise hands on this one, but you know, if you're in a relationship where one person's right all the time, how good is that? It doesn't work out real well normally. So, in effect, what I'm basically saying is that our first steps are usually to go educate someone. We're going to educate them to death. We're going to give them the information. We're going to carry that. And I'm going to describe that to me as one of the major impediments to us being successful. As a tendency that we're going to teach somebody else, we're going to do it. And unfortunately, because some of us fall into that category, we think we're supposed to be teaching in life or something. We're supposed to be passing this stuff on. What I'm suggesting to you is that that particular approach is actually skipping in exactly what's going on. It's missing the whole point. Because in truth, even if we're talking about a representative, somebody that's been elected to be there, they could go on the internet, and they don't have to go to a particular one. They could go on the internet and realize that there's an awful lot of information out there. And they didn't have to believe in one side or another, just knowing that you can't control dosage without controlling how much water people drink and how much they get from other, that should be enough. So one of the questions that I ask people normally, it's a trick question, by the way, but I'm going to ask you to raise your hands, and you're all going to be wrong, no matter which one of you raise your hand on, so don't be sad about that part. But I'd like you to pick between two things. Is the best way for us to get information out to give them a 2 to 3 page bullet point thing that's basically fairly large print so they can read it over really fast? Or do we have a 2.5 inch binder with 44 studies and all that kind of things? It's indexed with everything in there so they can find it. So all of those who believe the 3 page with the bullet points, raise your hand. All of you who think that the 44 page binder, 2 binder, raise your hand if you think that's better. Okay. Trick question because they won't read either one of them. and the problem is, I mean, David and I, we fought through this all the time.
We've done both.
How can we get all the qualifiers into a three page? You can't. You can't get all the qualifiers in there. And when you do the larger one, I mean, boy, you've got to really hope that one page hits them really quick or they're not going to read it. But the truth is, we've been to enough council meetings, and I know enough council people, even people are on our own side, they learn how to deal with things pretty much similar, whether they're on your side or the other side. There's unfortunately, and I'm not trying to pick on any one particular individual, but it's very common for a representative to be, what words can I use without saying bad words?
Two-faced.
Well, let's put it this way. Arrogant, first of all, because it's something that gets written about and it's actually very easily seen. Condescending is the other part of it. Dismissive, whatever words you want to call for part of that. Those are true from even people that I love and respect that have worked with us sometimes. They do exactly the same things. And I don't know where they take the course because it's going to happen on the first day. I used to think that it was something that just happened in big cities. The smallest of cities, I mean the smallest towns, I mean it's like your first day in there and they're already telling somebody what you have to do to get our attention. I mean they go through that process. What I would suggest is most people who become what we call anti, meaning that they've taken a position that's anti, meaning opposite of what the status quo is, and especially opposite of what a government says is doing, or opposite of a group of experts or something, that there's a process that goes along with that that actually characterizes this conflict, if you want to call it that, between two sides. And in essence, what I would suggest to you is that if you've chosen a side that's anti, there's a couple things that stand out really quick, and you're welcome to shout it out if you think you know what the top of that is. What's the first thing you know if somebody says they're anti?
Fanatic. Negative. They're good.
Okay, they want to stop something, obviously. The most important part is to remember that when you're anti, it means you're out of power. You have to be out of power, because if you're in power, you just do what you want. You don't have to be anti anything, and the truth is, and you can explain or not explain. You don't have to explain if you're in power either, they don't. So when you take an anti-position, you've proven that you're out of power. You've already ceded the majority. You've ceded authority to the other side, when in fact it may not be true at all. But we've done that because of how we handle ourselves and how we approach it. The next thing is that when we're the next thing is that we always carry their message, whatever the proponent's message is. This could be anti-vaccine, could be anti-mercury management, could be anti-fluoride, could be any of these things. We carry the proposing group, or the status quo message, we carry that message around with an X across it. And in essence, what we're doing is we're reinforcing their message by our opposition to it. And probably the one that's the most important because of the way it's affected us and his pocketbook and the hundreds of thousands of dollars, by the way, because we pursued it that way even when we knew better, is we took on the burden of proof. We decided that, oh, okay, they got this information. We have to actually bring the information out to prove they're wrong. Instead of them having to prove that they're right from the very beginning, we've taken on the active role of trying to prove that they're wrong. And what we've done is we've actually, again, ceded authority in another way. We've allowed someone else to be the judge. And so no longer does our opinion mean anything, and that's why it's so easy for them to characterize someone else as just. You're the only dentist. Even if there's two of you, you're the only dentist. Oh, okay, well, you're the only dentist. But the point being is that it's very easy to characterize because, in fact, what they've done basically is they've said, we have all the experts, we have all the authority, everybody agrees, you're the only one, and gosh, how can I help you get over your problem? It's your problem, not someone else's, and you're going to get characterized for it. And what I'm suggesting to you is that we take that on as a mantle just because that's the way we approached it. It isn't because you're not right about what you're talking about, but the chances of you talking to the right person in the right venue with what we have to say is poor. Now, if you're in a scientific situation like we get into with the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology, you can sit with people who understand the issue and may disagree totally, but at least you have a conversation going back and forth and may even get heated and so forth, but you really don't have endorsements making a determination. If you notice what happens in almost all the other kinds of what we would call controversial things when somebody becomes anti, what happens is somebody pulls out the endorsement game. These 100 people, these 100 groups, all these people endorse this situation. So you're no longer talking about facts anymore. You're talking about whose side you are. So the words that he's chosen here, he said, she said, I talk about every day. Because when I talk to a representative, I try to tell them that your only route for this to do a good thing for anybody is to get out of the he said, she said from either side. So here's what might be amazing for you in terms of the approach that I would take. The first thing, if I were talking to someone that was from your council, for example, and someone said, this is a stand-up kind of person and he's willing to address these things in a straight-up way, I would have to tell him that the first thing you have to do is you have to abandon all of your answers. You got to get rid of all of them. You can't be anti-fluoride anymore, or anti-mercury amalgam, or anti-anything else. You have to give it up. Even the big, huge balls they throw up there that you can just whack out of the park, you gotta let it go. You gotta let it totally go. And in fact, what's really hard for it is, if you're talking about a fluoridation issue, I would have to tell them that you now have to basically decide that you're going to represent all the people who are for fluoridation. That those are the people that you have to represent. Because those people deserve just as much attention to detail about what shows up in the truck as all of those of us who already knows what's going to show up in the truck. The reason why he has to give up the answers is because if he starts answering, then he becomes responsible, just like we were, of having to carry that burden of all that information, and nobody else has to answer for themselves, and so you never get what I'm going to get to is the answer for all of this thing, basically. So what I'm suggesting to you is that the very route that we take, because of the information we've learned, makes it harder for us to do the job we probably have to do. So I would suggest to you, for an example, if you're trained to go, they want to go talk to their city council. So they want to put something on the agenda and they want to show up. Okay, what would you expect to have happen if you showed up at the city council meeting? Even if every one of you showed up here, and by the way, we've orchestrated so everybody talked about a completely different thing, never repeating themselves, could do it within not only 3 minutes, but within 1 minute, because you usually cut your time down if they do it. What would you expect to have happen? Boy, you guys are really nice people. I'm really glad you guys want to participate in government, but you're not participating in mine. Because again, we're presenting the information, and what you typically are doing when you go in front of a city council in a meeting, you're looking for consensus for something by your presentation. I mean, that's amazing to happen just between people in general without having some kind of dialogue or time to listen to it. But if we're going to show up and basically present something to them, even as clear as what David's put out there, I mean, just the mere fact that in 2000, the cover story of the Journal of the American Dental Association came out and said, it doesn't work when you swallow it. 2001, CDC comes out and says, doesn't make any difference how much fluoride you put in the enamel, if you put up to 1,000 parts per million. It doesn't work that way. How come it didn't stop? Which is what his question was in the first place. And the reason is because it has nothing to do with this. And that's the hard part for those of us who've invested so much time and energy into learning about it, is we think, well, yeah, but we gotta tell them. We gotta tell them. So I would tell you that if I were working with somebody in a different community, obviously in most cases I'm talking to them on the telephone, and they were gonna go talk to one of the representatives, not two of the representatives, not four, not six, not with a whole group or anything else, they're gonna go and talk to them, that I would tell them that here's rule number one. And they get their pen out, and what's rule number one? You can't take any paper. You can take a business card if you got a business card, but you can't take any paper. Well, I just want to take the one on hip fractures because this person, I know he's got a problem with his wife who's got a hip fracture problem, and I want to make sure she gets to see it now. Because the moment you take over presenting the information again, you take on the burden of proof, and then I guarantee you, anything that any of you've learned about this issue, and I'm not doubting your sincerity or even your expertise in being able to know about it, I could actually, in any venue you put up, other than the scientific venue where they really get to talk about these things, I could make it look silly. One sentence, two sentences, where the information, but the normal audience would not be able to know which one of us is right. Now, you're right, that doesn't make a difference if I lie, because that's what ends up happening all the time, but expect the fact. In fact, normally if I were talking to someone going in and talk with them, we know we're going to talk about it a different way, and I'll just give you a kind of a teaser as the first half of that is that when I first get there, I would tell them that, a couple of weeks ago, we set up this appointment, I would have come in here with the hope that I could just get you on the ground, beat you up, and have you understand what I know, because I think it would be really important to you. And it wasn't until I learned, and I guess I really got through my head, that I realized as soon as I left, someone else is going to get you on the ground, beat you up, and tell you the opposite. And you're right back in the middle of this whole thing right here. And I think there's a better way. I think there's a different way, a better way for all of us, and a place that is to your benefit, to all of our benefit, basically. So what's the shift? What's the change? Here's what we found out when David suckered me into that, I have to say it that way, suckered me into working on this issue in the first place. We worked a couple of years and we stopped it. We took the old anti-fluoride approach to it, went around and stopped it in lots of places being anti-fluoride. But I would have to say that, I think it was 1998, that, and this was, I think we started in 1996. In 1998, I was able to get a congressional investigation on fluoride. Now, the importance of that was that what the House Committee on Science allowed me to do was to write questions that would go out to our various, what we would call protective agencies. And the reason why that was so important is my part we're calling was, why am I doing this? Why are we doing this? I mean, neither one of us, we weren't uncomfortable about the commitment we were making, but this is kind of silly. We got all these other agencies and entities that are set up to protect us. How come they're not doing anything? How come it's not all done already, kind of thing? And so it did turn out that what happened is they used my questions exactly as the way that they were established. And it turned out that they had to respond that they did not have one toxicological study on any of the silico fluorides that are used in fluoridation. Not one. Not any chronic study, meaning a toxicological study of continued use. Well, that changed a lot of people's minds really quick, but it didn't stop anything. You'd think that if that got out, that would have done everything, really, right? But it didn't. But what it did do is, because we actually had some interference with people who were anti-fluoride, which basically it meant that the committee didn't want to go forward with the hearing and all those things because they didn't want to be seen with an anti-fluoride person that was angry. They didn't want to be on that side of things, basically. But they did allow me to write questions that went to the FDA, to the CDC, to the National Academy of Sciences, and a name that you should learn about, NSF, which is now NSF International. But anyway, the main point behind me asking some of these questions was, I felt like I could ask the questions in a way that would be revealing. And because Congress has a different capacity than you and I do, they could ask the questions, and even though people do lie to them, they're not supposed to lie to them, and they have the ability to go after them if they do lie to them, basically. So even though we got some lies, and manipulations and so forth, to the most part, what they did is they revealed all kinds of stuff. So I want to ask you another question, just shout it out if you know what it is. Who's responsible for the quality of the water that you drink? Who's responsible for that?
City's supposed to be checking it.
Okay, and what agency either monitors or maintains that? Or is there any particular agency that you think has a better say-so than another one over the group at all?
EPA.
Okay.
I thought it was an FDA.
Okay. Now here's the amazing part. The total water situation, the EPA has what they call a remediation point. that says that your water district gets to determine the quality of its water, which means you can spend more money, you can do a lot of things to make your water better or overall. And at a certain point, if you don't do it, there's a remediation point, they call a maximum contaminant level of any kind of contaminants. They can come in and say, okay, sorry, you can't do this anymore, you're not responsible enough, so you either have to blend the water with some other water that makes it better, or you have to treat the water, or you can't use the water anymore. But in fact, they don't have anything to do with water additives. But every time you hear somebody that's in the full fluoride situation, you're going to hear them talk about the EPA, EPA, there are no federal safety standards for direct water additives at all. Not for the chlorine, not for the aluminum or whatever they're using for flocculation, not for the fluoride, for any of the rest of them. So who does determine that? Anybody guess?
Whoever has that water system. It's like people and individuals. The board,
Well, so the amazing part is there's only one entity that can determine the actual product that's going to be added to water, and that's the water board or the elected body that basically runs your water system. Now, your state has a law, and the law basically says that now that the EPA gave up all this oversight responsibility back in 1988, I mean, it's been that long, but once they gave it up in 1988, they basically established and dropped in a code that says, well, if you're going to buy a water additive, it has to meet a particular standard that's been established by industry. This is all the manufacturers getting together and figuring, okay, what do we want to do? Not, government body. So it's a non-governmental body. And so what happens is, in order for your water department to buy something, they have to buy one that actually meets that standard that's been established. What we found through the congressional investigation, because Congress had the right, through the questions I wrote, they said, is this really true? We wrote to NSF, is this really accurate? What's required for them to do? And they said yes. They repeated the words back again, and it was a peer review because we figured they would say we couldn't read. And then the third part is send the data that comes through these chemical manufacturers. So what do you think they said? I'm just making room for you to hold the answer. Not okay to have an answer there. In essence, what they said was, we don't do it that way. So from basically 2000, so we're looking at what, 14 years now. For 14 years, we have it in a public statement that they don't follow their own rules in terms of the requirements from their own chemical manufacturer. So what we learned, fairly early after that was that all the courts have determined that the public policy is a legitimate government interest. Now, David and I don't agree with that. We think there ought to be something different, but I understand why it's there. But they're basically saying the public policy, fluoridation can't hurt anybody. And the courts have said that's true. So you can't really go after the public policy. You can't file a lawsuit and stop them from making that basically decision that they want to make. But the product that shows up in the truck is something different. So most of you must have questioned, if not been mad about the fact that somehow our promoter of fluoridation can say that, that fluoridation is safe and effective and safe and effective and safe and effective. And if you had something that's sitting in your hand and you said it was safe and effective, then you get thrown in jail because you hadn't had it approved for those kind of statements. We know that that's basically a drug claim. Okay, so how do they get by with it? Well, because those statements are only about the public policy. They're not about the product. So what we learned is that if you find a route to basically kind of wend your way through this kind of thing, it's like there's a bureaucratic maze that protects all these things. So you can't just go running in. So as an example, people would ask me, well, how's the thing going? And I used to say, well, we got them all surrounded, but they have all the guns. If you run in too fast, they shoot you down. And the truth is, some of the people who are just wonderful people, I get mad sometimes because I watch it happen, but some wonderful people just go running in and get shot down, and then it scares the heck out of everybody, and everybody pulls back from it. Now when they ask me, well, how's it going, I say, we got them surrounded, because there really are more of us, more people who believe in the fact that they want safe drinking water than those people who really want to put fluoride in the water. But they still have lots of guns, and the difference is we have guns, but most of the people haven't learned how to use them. So we still have somebody who becomes a hero, runs in real quick and gets shot down. So there's a couple things that I try to talk about when somebody calls me up on the telephone. One of the first things is I don't always know how large a city is, even if I know the name. So I usually try to find out how large is the city. Why is that important?
Different, is the policy different for different size
Not necessarily, but it's a good thing to look at.
Bureaucracy is larger in a larger city usually.
Yeah. Well, I would tell you, for example, we're in San Diego and they're experts at stealing money. I mean, the truth is that this is not if, it's not when, it's, you know, I mean, it just basically is just watch it work and, you know, hope that you can find your way around part of it. So there is an assumption that if you're in a smaller city, especially as you get to some places that you might think of being more countrified, and in Canada, for example, there's a lot more direct contact with some of the people who represent them than there are in other communities, but that varies a little bit. The most important part is the community small enough that you can go touch everybody? So even though David describes me as having an approach, the truth is there's lots of different approaches. If it's small enough, you can go touch everybody. Meaning you can get at them, you can find a way to communicate with those people. You can have whatever message you want, and you can still accomplish it. So it's not really because what we look for, and that's what even a representative looks for, is basically we could say character, but it really is the political presence of the person who's carrying the message. In other words, are they someone that someone will listen to the message, and that they can portray in a way that someone will listen to them? And then two, is the message something that will travel? Will it go beyond the extent of that person carrying it? Okay, science doesn't make it. Sorry, science doesn't make it past the first two people. So David might tell me, and I might tell someone else, but the next person doesn't grasp all the things that's there, so they can't support it anymore. So in situations where you can actually have somebody touch everybody, you can, like I said, you can do whatever you want to do. All I would suggest is, what are you going to do 3 years from now? What are you going to do 5 years from now? Because in certain instances, they're just going to be back again. They're going to do it all over again. It's going to be the same message, and it's just, how do you want to spend your time? Now, Dr. Presley, he has a different situation. One, you were more politically involved in the community. There's more community involved in part of it, and so he could take it more direct. And there have been places, we've won them that way, that if you're in that kind of a community, you can take a full anti-fluoride kind of a thing straight on, and you can have enough political presence that basically it equates to political power. Because that's, political presence is the hope that you don't have to keep showing all the political power. But otherwise, you can do it that direction. But the problem to it is, if media is going to play a very large role at all in the situation, which is sometimes it does, we virtually, I can't think of too many cities where we have the media on our side. They're virtually always telling everybody that this is the thing you put in the water to, basically make your teeth, reduce tooth decay. And that's what it is, and these people are complaining about it, as opposed to looking at it from an even scale. So what I'm suggesting to you, if you get to a place that where you're not able to touch everybody else, that there is a real reason for paying attention to a strategy about how you get this part done. So one, I'll raise my hand and say to you that that's what I do. If you decide within your community that you want to create a strategy and you want to follow through with it and you actually want to take it out of the water, I would tell you first of all that you need to be prepared for the fact that I'm going to tell you that, okay, all that other stuff about how bad it is, that doesn't help you with those audiences. But in fact, we take it out of places that have been fluoridated for 55 years. And started off with the council basically being 5-1 that they want to continue to fluoridate. And have the state come in and try to jump on them, and the dental societies come in and jump on them. And they're not fluoridating. But we never took out, in some cases we did, but most of the cases, we don't get rid of the law that says they have to fluoridate. We don't care about the public policy. What we're aiming at is to do a couple things. So here's what we're asking someone to do, is to become an advocate for due diligence. Citizens for Due Diligence is actually the name of the corporation. But we become an advocate for due diligence with a focus on 4 things. One of them is accountability. Okay, now the easy part for this is who's going to be accountable for those claims that it effectively is going to reduce tooth decay on virtually everybody and safe for virtually everybody. A second thing is transparency and full disclosure. And what happens is, even people who really didn't know how it was all going to turn out, but their representatives, they write a letter to someone and they won't answer them, or they start giving them a bunch of phooey, they're going, that's not good enough, I'm not willing to take that either. So it's not a matter of having to prove what their answers are right or wrong, it's the fact that they won't talk straight. And that makes everybody mad, basically. Third thing is compliance with all laws. And what I would suggest to you and throw out here for you is that we have laws to protect us that would prevent all these things from happening. It's a matter of how we make certain that they get applied. But in fact, it has to be us that make certain it gets applied. And the other one is conformance to all industry standards that they're already telling everybody that they're following through with. you're gonna be amazed at the fact that probably, I'm gonna say 90% of all the water districts I've ever talked to, they didn't even know what the standards were. They didn't have the manual. They didn't understand what the process was for a particular product that they were gonna add to the water. So, I'm gonna suggest a couple of things, and then I'll end real quickly, and then you can ask questions to David or me or whatever. One of the things that I'll throw out to you is that one of the things we miss when we're so anxious about what we've learned is that we're not really careful about our audience and what they're, where they are, what they want to do. And I would suggest to you that the public, science doesn't mean anything to the public. There's somebody who's going to lie on one side or say something on the other side. And despite the fact that that's where, if anything, that the promoters of fluoridation would like you to do is to talk about the science, you could end that with one question. You could end it with one question. What do you think it would be? Proof. Okay, proof of what? All I'm looking for is just one toxicological study on the health and behavior effects of the continued use of hydroglycolic acid. Can you send me one of those? Just one. That's all I want to know. Game over. There are two of them out now that he described, which most people don't even know exist. But at the time when they've been fluoridating all this time, up until 2010 and 2011 when these came out, there were absolutely no toxicological studies on health and behavior effects. So this game has gone on for this whole time without even one study of the actual stuff that gets put in the water. So instead of having to put comments in after you see a story where they give you 10 lies in the first 400 words that they put in there, and you're trying to madly figure out how do I answer every one of those things without, with this big huge paper coming back, all you have to do is, thank you for sharing. I'm glad that you participated with your connections. You should be able to help me out. I can't find this. Can you give it to me and make it public so every one of us can see it? End the game. There is nothing else. There's no other science. They're not able to give up with the study on that specifically. But from a public's perception, what I'm going to describe to you is that I believe that you have to start in a different place than we all start. Most of the time when we're talking to the public, we're talking about what we've concluded, what we've learned, what we know, what the science has already said. The basically here are studies that people have put out there. We're trying to communicate people as if proof was the most important aspect, instead of a foundation for their understanding it, and we have to say in the first place. So I'm going to suggest a couple of things. I'm going to ask you to just throw names out there if you would right now. I'm going to suggest to you that the majority of your audience is in the public. Well, let me ask you a question here first, and you can throw these numbers out for it. If you had to imagine what percentage of your population is knowledgeable about fluoride, what percentage would you pick?
1%.
One, I guess.
Who's got the highest?
Jim's got a 5 here.
5. That's pretty high. I heard one say 20 in a town that evidently the educated, but most people end up 1%, 1.5%, 2, 5, something like that. It's almost always in single digits in most cases. What percentage of the people would say in your community that they're for safe drinking water? Okay, we don't really know what either one of those percentages are, but we know where they lean towards, right? So my question to you is, do we have to take all the people who are on our side, because I have command of all of them for safe drinking water, that I know what they want to hear and what they're willing to say yes to? Why do I have to turn all those people into zealots against fluoride? Why don't I just take it? Just do what should have been done in the first place. And that's where I came out when we said before I could see your eyes batting a little earlier when I said, how about representing all the people who are for fluoridation? They've been promised that what's going to show up in the truck is going to reduce tooth decay, and it's going to be safe. And that it's going to be, somehow there's going to be some monitoring or something else that has been perfectly taken care of. And the truth is, we go back here and shine the light on that and it's not there anymore. We're doing a job for them that should have been done all the time. So let's assume they shot everybody and got rid of everybody that was anti-fluoride. The duty of the water supplier would be exactly the same. It's still supposed to be, if nothing else, even if they do share responsibility of buying something that was going to complete something, as opposed to arguing about it. And let me add one more thing to that guess that what happens when you have a spill. Okay, so let's say we're fighting about what's in it, how much arsenic's in it, how much cadmium's in it, how much beryllium's in it, how much mercury's in it, how much lead's in it. Well, and so one side said, well, not very much, I mean, it's not enough to worry about one way or the other, after you dilute it, but we're gonna spell it before we dilute it. Okay, so what do we tell the first responders?
Don't touch it.
Well,
Suit up.
well, the truth is, we should be telling them to suit up, that's for sure. And if they knew it was in it, they would definitely suit up. But right now, what the city council would have to tell them is, there's an argument about that. Some people say there's some arsenic in it, and some people say it's not. It's really such a little amount that I'm not sure that it would bother you. Although, nobody really talked to any of the council meetings what would happen if you would just stick your hand in there. You know, what would happen if you got it on your hand, or if you rub it and put a little bit on your arm, or you got some on your face or something like that. You know, 10 years of vomiting, you know, every morning and every day. They forgot to put that on the list of things that that person would go through if they didn't know what was in that before they messed around in the first place. So there's more reason than just fighting about, you know, your particular right or desire not to have that stuff in the water. So, in fact, there's lots of reasons why there should be more knowledge about what's going to show up in the truck. So the words that happen for those people who take this issue on in a little different way is instead of safe and effective and all those kind of things, it's bait and switch. I mean, that would be the same kind of bait and switch you'd see somewhere. Somebody says it's the greatest thing in the world. I've been told that. They told David that several times. It's the greatest thing in the world. Okay, so now what happens is if it doesn't show up and it's not the greatest thing in the world, whose problem is that? So, from my standpoint, I think that becomes really important. Okay, so I'm going to ask a couple other questions right now and have you just throw some things out with it. And part of this is because of what I believe is something that has to change. There are two things that basically I believe that the promoters of fluoridation do not want your public to know. Because if they do know, they no longer will buy into what they're selling. And most of you have already seen it. We sell it on the idea that we got tooth decay, and then we skip right over here over to the fact that we got to put some more fluoride in the water. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about basically is one that hopefully it's something that, by the way, that you can get out through your own community. And if somebody ever wants to take that on, I'll show you how to be able to do that. But one of them has to do with the nature of fluoride. That when people learn about the nature of fluoride, because right now, it's my belief, that they believe it's the thing you put in toothpaste or you put in water in order to reduce tooth decay. That's what it is. It's an it. And you'll see it in the newspaper. It's an it all the time. Fluoride's an it. It's not one of the thousands of compounds that are so impactful on our lives. So I know that you started off with some of those before, and so you guys may have talked about it before. I'd like you to just throw out, so each of you can hear from other people, throw out some different kind of things that you know that fluoride is used for. Any one of you, just throw one out there.
Medications.
Excuse me?
Medications. Is it still sales?
It's an enzyme inhibitor. So it inhibits 150 different enzymes. It's also used to accentuate or basically potentiate certain things as well. Which ones?
Gases to produce anesthetics.
Okay, so sevoflurane, if you were going to have anesthesia, they're going to give you a fluoride. Normally, a larger number of fluorine molecules and a couple of bromine and a couple of fluorine, and that's what's going to knock you out. How about Rohypnol? Anybody know what Rohypnol is?
The rape drug.
That's what they call a date rape drug.
Yeah.
Okay, what does that do? Creates a retrograde amnesia in a particular part of the brain. Well, it does that. I mean, pharmaceutical industry knows what fluoride does to you and can do to you, kind of thing. What other kind of things can we think? Okay, so just some of them throw them out there. You guys all should know probably these if you've been looking at it all. Prozac, Zoloft, anything that's what they call an SSRI, what they call a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Why? Because it does certain things, and David would clip these off for you probably if he'd had more time before, but one of them is that, remember that the fluoride concentrations that get in your body are going to they're going to inhibit melatonin production. Okay, so what's melatonin production going to do? What's it for? What do we sleep? Sleep, but we need to realize it's also body cycles of all kinds, including when women begin menses. So that's why we have kids having kids, because when you start off with a larger amount of melatonin to begin with, and if it's not replaced fairly early, then it diminishes. That determines what the days are when they actually begin menses. So when they're capable of reproducing. Okay, what else does it interfere with? Serotonin. So it inhibits serotonin production. Okay, so that serotonin, for those of you who don't know, is the chemical that goes from one brain neuron to another brain neuron. And when they do things like SSRIs, I call it like a ping pong ball. Whether that's really how it is or not, that's how I see it. What they do is they make it so that it's not taken up by the receiving neuron, so it's out there banging around, so the body thinks it's got more serotonin. And if you go off of the drug, this is where we see the shootings and everything else, all of them are going off of those drugs, and you're not supposed to go off of them that quick, because your body doesn't have that stuff in the first place. Okay, but serotonin. Obviously serotonin is also another one that basically helps with your mood, usually is a mood enhancer. What else, what other kind of things? It inhibits insulin production. It inhibits thyroxine production. It inhibits calcium metabolism. What else could you do to yourself? David knows that one. I mean, okay, so I don't have one, but are you gonna skip all 5 of them? You know, I mean, there's enough stuff going on that exposure means something. And so it's important to understand that the pharmaceutical industry already knows that. They create products to do these things, to stop this, to start this, and to do these things. So this is not us with a little body of knowledge over here, we're the only ones that know. Industry already knows about all this. How about some other things? Let's go through more quickly. Other things that you can think fluoride's used for.
Antibiotics.
Okay, and
Pesticides.
well, antibiotic pesticides is one of the reasons, one of the big reasons. I would suggest to you that drinking water is not, you know, sometimes the most important aspect of it, because you get pesticides. If you're not eating organic, you're getting cryolide on a lot of different things. And you're also, as we talked about before, or I talked to some people before, you're getting it through BES, through dermal exposures. So the problem is not, you know, if David would ask his best friends that had enough money, what would you do if all of a sudden you found out they're putting all this toxic stuff in the water? Well, I'd just go buy a filter. And he's going, well, what about all the people who can't buy filters? Yeah, don't worry about it. But then that's how life is right this second. That's why part of that is happening. Let me throw some other ones out there because I want to move through this quickly, and you guys have been really nice to be able to listen so far. But a couple of things that I would have you pay attention to. Industry loves fluoride because it's able to create tighter molecular bonds. Most of you probably heard that Teflon is fluoride. But what you probably didn't hear is that Scotchgard is fluoride. And so is Stainmaster is fluoride. And so is the Gore-Tex ski equipment is fluoride. And go a little step even further. The wrappers that you use on things so that it doesn't soak through your seat when you're bringing it home from fast food, it's got a fluoride rinse on it so that it doesn't eat through there. Things that they want to have give a longer shelf life, they're going to put it on the inside of whatever the container is so that it doesn't eat through faster. So I'm not talking about that having to be exposure. I'm talking about the fact this is a powerful use for it. It's all around us, but nobody's calling it that same way. If you're going to crack petroleum products, we wouldn't have gas this way if we didn't have the fluoride. It's cracking petroleum products. You're finding almost every heavy metal. So by the time you start going through the fact that it etches glass and eats through concrete and does all these other kind of things, you start finding that there's tons of other things. It also disrupts molecular bonds. So it's the bully of the periodic chart. It's the most aggressive seeker of another electron. What I have found is that when in communities we have the chance, because there's actually ways to get that information out, that when the general public understands the nature of fluoride, you don't have to think it's bad, you don't want it. Because you can't believe that it can do all these things and still can't be powerful enough to do whatever it wants to do to you also. So despite the fact that the people who will never believe that probably are the people who know the most about fluoride, because we believe we've got to tell them the most important one, that I don't believe that's what the public has to see before they already recognize the other side is selling us. The tendency on our side is we have to answer everything the other side says. And what I'm suggesting to you is, that's not palatable to the people listening to that either. I mean, they're looking at them and going, okay, you guys are doing a lot of exaggerating. The fact that you got to call this other person over here, you know, a wacko or something like that shows me you don't have the answer either. I mean, there's a tendency to think that somehow people are too dumb and that they're listening to all this and believing all of it, when I don't actually think it's true. Okay, second thing that I would put out there is that the public needs to be able to hear, once they hear, doesn't believe the other side either, and that's what they don't want to know, is all the fluoride that's already available in foods already. Now, you may have already gone through that already, and hopefully, if you ask, I can send you an email with some documents or something like that that can give you some examples of that. But why would there be fluoride in Coca-Cola? She says water. What do you think?
Shelf life.
Excuse me?
Shelf life. Shelf life.
Shelf life.
Preservative.
Shelf life.
No, actually, it's, well, I don't know. They may also do something for that. But the truth of it is that it's in the syrup. It's a phosphate. We all know it's a phosphate. It was the same thing, and so we got fluoride. So in San Diego, where we didn't have fluoride in the water at all, we had 0.9 parts per million fluoride in the water, in our Coca-Cola. But our water only had 0.3. Why we have it all in there? Because it's already in the syrup. And so most of our sodas are really high and so forth. What other kind of places that would you maybe not expect fluoride to be high? How about cereals? Okay, Wheaties, 10 parts per million. What?
Fruit Loops.
Fruit Loops. Fruit Loops has less than 10 parts per million. Why would it be less than Wheaties? I'm just making room for you to hear that. That in essence, what happens is there's not very much grain in Wheaties. So by the time you look at why it is in Wheaties, it's because they sprayed a pesticide on there. They used water to process it. They basically got rid of all the water and all the fluoride stayed in there, and so the Wheaties and these other things like that, basically stay very high, and this other one's just basically sugar product. The one that's surprising to some people is your mechanically deboned meats. Okay, think about this, when you go in the store and you decide you're going to go down, you're going to pick up a package that's already cut up for you. Oh, okay, wait a minute. That's got clips of bone that could be 400 parts per million, 600, 800 parts per million, that's all part of there. And there's just little shavings in there, it's not something you see. But again, some of these exposures are really high for people. So I'm suggesting to you that there's a big long list for some of these. When you start looking at lettuce, the head lettuce and some of these others, tomatoes, grapes especially and so forth. What I'm suggesting to you is when the public gets a better understanding of how much is in some of these things, they do not believe that you have to be adding this into water. So you don't have to tell them, God, this is terrible, this is bad, this is that kind of thing. It's so much easier for you to carry the message. Even more importantly, every time you talk about, if you were to make the description that foods and beverages are really high in fluoride and there's too much food in our food and beverages already. It used to be up until 2005, the newspapers wouldn't even carry that, wouldn't even put that in the newspaper. Now they will. But because they thought it was going to be impactful, what we find out is when you say that it's in all these foods and beverages, everybody makes the assumption it's just from the water and they never really think about it too much. And in fact, it's not very effective. Once they learn it's in Coca-Cola, once they learn it's on lettuce, once they learn that it's on grapes, or it's on raisins that the kids take in their box, or other things like that, there's a whole different thing, because every time you see the product, it pushes a button and they get to rethink about fluoride being there, and so they become reminded of it. So, to end kind of my point of putting this out there is that there's a different approach that you can take. Most of it is a strategy. It's done piece by piece instead of all going in. It doesn't take a lot of people. It doesn't take any money. It doesn't take, basically any expertise of the science. What it does is take basically just a more balanced idea of how we're going to approach someone and give them room for them to come to the decision we want them to. And I will add to that is there's good reason why they should say no to you if you came in and you wanted to stop fluoridation. Remember what you're asking them to do. I want you to raise your hand and tell everybody that this city has been harming people for the last 50 years. And I want to be the one that wants to champion that for you. And by the way, I'm going to get hit by every dentist that come over here and say I'm a wacko and somebody wants to take me out of office. And my friends don't want to hear about it. And the truth is, I can't carry all that science stuff. So in fact, what we're really asking them to do is to fall on their sword for us. I don't know that that's that appropriate, even though I would love for all of them to be statesmen and do that part. I know how to be able to show them how to do that where because they are after due diligence and accountability, there's ways they can phrase everything and they can actually be a hero for everybody. And they can withstand all their excess of the pressure that can come. So anyway, I'll give you right now, because it's not up there, my email is greenjeff@cox.net. Green Jeff, just like the color. greenjeff@cox, C-O-X.net. And you're welcome to email me if you feel like you're going to take some kind of an action and that kind of thing. But that's what I work on is how do we move from here to here as opposed to all the other stuff. And I'm going to leave it open.
Can I start with a question?
Sure.
Do you have any recommendations for, we're all into detoxing here, but what would be your recommendations for those of us who can't have a fluoride burden? How can we detox?
Maybe you should vitamin C.
Iodine,
Sony.
We're on all those things.
Now, you're already detoxing. The other way is to lift weights because you need to make your bone turnover because the bones are where it's all accumulated. If you don't lift a heavy enough weight to make the bone bend,
The body doesn't know that bone might break. Like skiing, you go down the hill, you hard turn. If you do that enough, then all of a sudden your bones get stronger. They turn over, they remodel. So weightlifting will help your body turn over so your kidney gets another chance to get at it. And I personally think to drink distilled water. I drink water that has no fluoride in it because there's, if I'm going to quit smoking, I'm just going to smoke less.
What
No.
do you think about reverse osmosis? I know that.
It lowers it, and it would be better than drinking tap water, I know that, but on the other hand,
What about Kangen water?
Kangen's high. That is the lady,
Is distilled
It's high in what?
fluoride. And they say it's not. I had a lady that said, oh, Dr. Kennedy, you just gotta drink this Kangen water. And I said, well, how do they remove the fluoride? Oh, it doesn't have to be removed, they magically made it all become fine. And so it's not a problem, it's just wonderful water. And I said, I don't believe in magic. And she said, no, it's really low in fluoride, and gave me a bottle and said, measure it, and it was like, same as San Diego tap water.
Can you give 1-year-olds distilled water for the water?
You should, you know what, if you were a cave woman, that was the only kind of water you had, because it came out of the sky and you caught it and you gave it to baby if you wouldn't give it loose water. Distilled water is water with hasn't been running around on the ground for a long time, and that's where like in West Texas, that's where the fluoride is in the water, because it's the aquifer, the decomposed granite from the Rockies, and that's why the people in China were crippled, is decomposed granite.
So that's what babies should have, is distilled water.
That's the only kind of, unless you're one of those kids.
Well, I'd like to answer one part about it having to do with reverse osmosis, because people go spend a lot of money for these things because the industry says it will take fluoride out. If you look at the brochures that happen for reverse osmosis equipment, they will give you a number like 79 or 98% or 97% or some kind of a number on there. First of all, the number that they're utilizing, they always use 8 parts per million going down to 0.9 parts per million. First of all, you don't have 8 parts per million in water. But it always goes down to 0.9. None of them show it going 0.9 down to 0.1. Why? Because they will take out the heavier compounds, the bigger compounds. It will take out some of the heavier compounds. What it's not taking out is the free fluoride ion, which is the part that is seeking calcium-rich tissue and running around your body and doing all the bad stuff. So the real difficulty is that the industry, unfortunately, is teaching itself to keep on using those same words over and over and over again. Some people actually end up using basically what you would think of being a filter that has aluminum in it, and sometimes it would be in pellets and so forth and running it through. They just don't last very long. And the question always is, how much aluminum fluoride do you get? Because they don't measure that. I don't want aluminum fluoride any worse than I want fluoride at all. David has a system, and he can explain it, but then you'd have to spend, what do you get into it now? 10,000? 10,000.
It doesn't work.
And it doesn't work.
Is there a filter that you recommend?
Bone char.
Pardon me?
Bone char works, but
What?
bone char. If you take an animal and you eat all the meat and you got all the bones left over, you take those and you crunch them up and you heat them up and you turn them into a little tiny, basically calcium hydroxyapatite, which is what your teeth are made out of. The enamel on your teeth, calcium hydroxyapatite, and it's black. I'm not sure why. And that's put that into a filter. But all filters fail for the same reason that the Grand Canyon is there. You know how the stuff came out of the sky and it kind of landed all over the place and it ended up going down one little place and it ate a hole in the planet? Water channels through filters. So whatever filter you have, isn't it, salesman? Oh, my filter will last 14 years or 10 years or 3 years. Filters don't last on I'm going to take your filter and put it in front of the Niagara Falls and we'll see how long it lasts. Oh, well, it won't last that long there. Well, so filters last on a number of gallons. So if they're trying to say a period of time, it's the same as the dentist in 1 part per million. The wrong standard, the wrong parameter. They don't last a function of time, they last a function of volume. So how many gallons will your filter treat? And what have you got, a swimming pool? Good questions.
She's very big.
Please.
Yes, there has been such an increase in autism and so many other diseases. Have you linked any of your studies with autism or any other diseases that have been increased in the last couple of decades?
Yeah, and the autism, I believe, is the thimerosal vaccine. Thimerosal is methylate, mercurochrome, ethylmercury, and thimerosal are all the same thing. It's evil with different names, and so there's no reason to inject a child with mercury anyway. I'm on a website that's called Vaccines for Saskatoon or something like that, and people yelling, oh, you know, the whole world will die if you don't inject these children with vaccines. And I said, why not use vaccines that have no poisons in them? Oh, well, the children are going to die if we don't. They won't answer that one. You know, it's like, I've got smallpox vaccination. That didn't kill me, but you don't have to hit them on the day they're born. That's when your autism leaps way up. And their go-to guy is number one on the Interpol list, because he stole over $1 million for the Aarhus University in Denmark, and they can't find him. I said, just get the CDC to mail him another check. Follow the address to tell. Strange how they'd be so inept when they want to be. So if you look at what Jeff was talking about, it's the same thing I was talking about getting rid of mercury. It's enforcement of existing laws, compliance with all standards. That's who's not in favor of law and order? Who's not in favor of compliance with the standards? Who's not in favor of those kind of things are the people that are breaking those laws. So, and they all of a sudden don't want to come out and say, by the way, I don't want to enforce all standards. I don't want to comply with the law because it would make it hard for me to get rid of this stuff. So, China would be very upset. They were very nice to me, though. You can watch my documentary. It's on my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is David Kennedy DDS, all one word, DAVIDKNNEDY And I've got, we're over 30 now, public access TV programs. So if you have a public access TV and you need it, community television, they call it in some places or whatever, and you'd like to have some programs, I have, Monica will send you 30 of them so you can play David Kennedy DDS programs on your local public access TV. I don't make any money at this. I spend a lot of money working for it, and just like my interpreter in China said, after I thanked her for the tremendous amount of help she gave us filming the documentary there, I said, thank you, thank you, thank you. And she said, oh, but it's my duty. It's my duty. Thank you very much.
Our state having some kind of germ in the water that kills brain cells. I think it happened in the soda fairs. And they are now treating all the water systems in Louisiana, and recently Benton Water, which comes from Bossier Parish or Bossier City, was being treated so strongly that it burned your nose to flush the commode or take a shower.
You know, I'm happy that they treat the water, because, you know, if you watched, where was the earthquake down there? Was it Jamaica? Where where all the buildings fell down and the UN rushed in, and some of the UN people had chronic cholera, and then all of a sudden half the island died or something like that, you know, thousands of people. That's because they don't have a water treatment facility that's sufficient to remove nasty things from water. So water treatment is a very good idea. What they're not willing to tell you is that putting chlorine in the water increases the risk of prostate and breast cancer. There are 10 studies done by the EPA that showed exactly that. So when they walk around with the little pink ribbon and say, oh, we gotta go fight breast cancer, yada, 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 why don't we quit coughing? Then we can worry about, you know, some other stuff. But I don't know how to make water that you can hose down your driveway and squirt on the grass and drink at the same time. So let's stop lying to the public. Yes, we've got that pesky animal out of the water, and we had to put in a bunch of really nasty chemicals to do it. And so, since it's an animal, whatever kills it will also kill you. And so what we recommend strongly is that you go ahead and take those chemicals back out. It's like soup. If I had the best French onion soup in the world, and I put it in a tower about 20 miles that way, and put a pipe in the ground and ran it over to your house, and I think I'll have some French onion soup. You just can't get food quality soup to go 20 miles through pipes. The same is true of water. You can't do that. So what I think they need to do is to fess up to the fact that what we have is industrial liquid that we can use for industrial purposes, and that what we need to do is to retreat it before we use it.
Meaning a household filter.
Household filter, or go to the water store and get big jugs if you're strong like me.
What water do you get when you get it in the jug?
What?
What kind of water do you get when you get it in the
It
jug?
depends on what the water store is doing to it. Most water stores are using high-pressure reverse osmosis, and that's different than the home reverse osmosis. If you open up a reverse osmosis home, the membrane is like thin, and so an industrial one, the membrane is like inch and a half thick, and the water goes down inside here under pressure. It'll squeeze it through, and you get good stuff out this way and the bad stuff out that way.
What about the plastic bottle it's in those?
Well, why don't you get a glass bottle? Or you can use a non-bisphenol A. You're concerned about BPA, so they make plastics that don't have BPA. So it's like people worry about getting rid of their mercury fillings and get a BPA kind. But don't use the BPA kind. I mean, it's real simple. Go sideways.
So there's no home reverse osmosis that would have an industrial type of filter on it?
Not that I've been able to.
Because you need higher water pressure.
You need pressure
In some
that's not
cases-
coming from water.
In some cases, they need heat. So that's why we're talking about Dasani or Aquafina that you buy at a convenience store. One's made by Coca-Cola, one's made by Pepsi. Those are reverse osmosis water. They call it purified water. And it doesn't have any fluoride in it. But they have the ability and they have the redundancy to do it. They don't lose any water, and that part will be done. So it's not the technology, it's the technology in the house won't do it. You can't do a whole house reverse osmosis. You can't make enough water on demand to take a shower or bath.
Yeah,
So those are good waters, Dasani and,
Well, they're safer waters, and I think everybody would say that spring water would probably be better water if you were talking about buying a bottled water of some type.
Mountain Spring in San Diego, Palomar, the White House drinks,
The stuff using
Poland Springs, is it?
from Arkansas.
Yeah, Arkansas, Poland Springs.
But what about the distilled water?
I drink distilled water.
That's what I mean.
Distilled water is water.
Homemade?
There's not, I got a machine. Actually, I used to have a machine. It cost me, it's gotta go back in and be fixed.
What about bathing in it? I mean, isn't bathing in fluoride?
I quit taking that. It goes right through you. It's not and how about swimming? How about going to the YMCA and do the exercise? You know, it's insane what drugs in the water supply.
I was telling somebody earlier, between the 1920s and 1960s, one of the treatments of choice, meaning that it was one of the most widely used at that time. If you want to slow your thyroid down, was to put the person in the bathtub with water, and the treatment time was 20 minutes. And it was enough to slow the thyroid down by just sitting in the bathtub with water with fluoride. In 20 minutes.
Why do we have an issue with people with thyroid syndrome?
So, don't pretend like you're in for it, don't sit back. Take care.